3 hours before dawn, an entire forest came down the Alder River toward Bellwether. It came in the dark as a moving wall of black trunks, torn roots, and mud. Men who had laughed at Caleb Rusk 4 days earlier stood silent on the new bridge, their faces pale beneath emergency lights. County Engineer Owen Mercer gripped the rail as the first root ball struck a pier hard enough to shake the concrete under his boots. Upstream, the old Sawmill log boom began to take the load. Its cedar timbers bent. Its chains screamed. One anchor line disappeared beneath the water, then rose again under a mass of broken pine. At the release station beside the abandoned mill channel, 78-year-old Caleb stood with both hands on a rusted lever, waiting for a moment no computer model had predicted. Northridge Timber's director saw the painted company marks on the trees and stopped speaking. Caleb had warned them the flood would not come alone. He had warned them the bridge could become a dam. He had warned them the old boom had never been built to stop a river. It had been built to turn one. But Bellwether did not know why Caleb understood that system so well. They did not know whose hands had truly designed it. They did not know what his father had done on another flooded night nearly 60 years earlier. Before dawn, Caleb would have to choose between saving the town and protecting the last good thing he still believed about his family. Could he turn the river without letting the truth turn against him? Stay with Caleb Rusk for this story. Some rivers remember what people bury, and some old skills matter most when modern systems fail. Caleb was not rebuilding that boom to prove himself right. He was rebuilding it because Bellwether had forgotten what the Alder River still knew. 4 days earlier, the Alder River looked harmless. Late autumn light lay flat across the abandoned sawmill channel. Leaves gathered along the mudbanks, and mill footings rose from the weeds like broken teeth. Caleb Rusk stood knee-deep in the water beside a hand winch bolted to a cedar post. He wore cracked boots, a canvas coat, and the wool cap he had owned since the mill closed. A chain ran from the winch to a cedar timber floating 20 feet away. He leaned into the handle. The winch clicked. The timber moved 6 inches. The first laugh came from the bait shop porch. "Careful, Caleb. You might catch yourself a whole log." Caleb kept turning. Northridge Timber had chosen that morning for a public inspection of the new Alder Bridge. County officials and company trucks lined the road while the town gathered to hear how the bridge and upstream sensors would protect Bellwether. Everyone could see Caleb rebuilding something already declared obsolete. Grant Vail, Northridge's director, crossed toward the channel. He wore a clean white shirt beneath his company vest and carried a hard hat he had not put on. "What exactly are you building?" he asked. "A boom." Grant looked at the chain and floating timber. "A loch boom?" Caleb nodded. "Well, that should be useful if 1957 comes back." The crowd laughed louder. Owen Mercer, the county's hydraulic engineer, followed Grant to the bank. He did not laugh. He carried a tablet and looked more worried than amused. "Mr. Rusk, you filed no permit for work in this channel. Wasn't a channel when your office mapped it. It is still county-controlled water." Caleb pointed to a faded line cut into a concrete footing. "That mark is from '68. The line stood nearly 4 feet above the current water. "The historical record does not show water reaching that height," Owen said. "The record was written after the water went down." The nearest people stopped talking. Grant folded his arms. "You think this fence is going to protect the bridge?" "It isn't a fence." "Then what is it?" Caleb looked toward the north slope. 4 years earlier, wildfire had burned the watershed. Dead trees still stood above logging roads carrying rainwater straight toward the Alder. Caleb had walked those roads the previous week. He had seen soil separating from roots and fallen trunks stacked against one another. "The bridge isn't what the river will hit first," he said. Owen opened a document on his tablet. "I'm issuing a temporary stop, work order. You have 48 hours to remove every post, chain, and timber. If the county clears it, the cost will be assessed against your property." Caleb did not touch the notice. Grant removed a folded envelope from his vest. "There is another option." Northridge had tried for 6 months to buy Caleb's 11-acre cedar stand. The latest offer could pay the balloon mortgage. Mara arrived before Caleb answered. She crossed the road in clinic scrubs beneath a heavy coat, breathing hard. "Uncle Caleb, tell me you didn't spend the property tax money on this." Caleb looked at the new hardware beside the winch. Mara followed his gaze. "The payment is due in 30 days. "I know." "Then sign Grant's offer." Grant extended the envelope. Mara lowered her voice, but the crowd could still hear. If you cut those trees for this thing, there will be nothing left to sell. You'll lose the house. Grant glanced toward the onlookers. Unless he plans to make money another way. He pointed at the channel. Anything caught there could be called salvage. Hundreds of trees come down after a serious storm. Maybe Caleb isn't confused. Maybe he wants to own whatever floats past. The accusation traveled through the crowd. An old man clinging to the past became a desperate man building a trap for profit. Mara searched Caleb's face. Is that what this is? Caleb could have answered. Instead, he stepped into the water and gripped the winch. Owen raised his voice. 48 hours. Caleb pulled. The chain tightened with an iron groan. The cedar timber rotated until it rested not straight across the channel, but 37 degrees downstream. Owen watched the angle. Grant laughed again. Caleb looked toward the slope and set the first locking pin. That night, after the road emptied and the stop-work notice hung wet against his door, Caleb opened his father's old toolbox. He expected a folded drawing beneath the wrench tray. There was no drawing, only a small brass key, blackened with age and stamped. Kabon. The brass key rested in Caleb's palm like something that had been waiting longer than he had. He turned it beneath the kitchen light. C4 had been stamped into one side. On the other, almost worn smooth, was a shallow groove where his father's thumb must have rubbed it over the years. Caleb remembered that habit. Harlan Rusk had carried small things in his pockets and large things in his silence. When Caleb was 10, his father had taken him to the sawmill before sunrise. The river was black, the boom lights glowing in the fog. Harlan stood on the catwalk above the channel and taught him how to watch moving timber. Don't look at the log, he said. Look at the water around it. Caleb did not understand. Harlan pointed to the wake curling off a cedar trunk. The river tells you where the weight wants to go before the wood gets there. That was how Caleb learned. Not from diagrams. From wet boots, strained chains, and his father's hand closing over his shoulder whenever a timber shifted wrong. By 19, Caleb could hear when a line carried too much load. He knew one root ball could turn 3 straight logs sideways, and a badly placed boom could become more dangerous than no boom. Bellwether called Harlan a riverman. After the flood of 1968, they called him a hero. The story Caleb heard all his life was simple. Rain fell for 6 days. The alder climbed above the mill road. A mass of timber broke loose upstream, and Harlan used the old boom to divert it before it destroyed the mill and half the town. There was a photograph in the newspaper. Harlan stood beside the release station with mud to his waist and blood on one sleeve. The caption called him the man who saved Bellwether. Caleb kept a copy in his father's toolbox, but the older Harlan became, the less he spoke about that night. Whenever Caleb asked about the boom sequence, Harlan gave him the same 3 lines. First line took the load. Second line turned it. Third line finished the job. That was all. Anne had noticed the gaps long before Caleb did. She married him in 1974, when the mill whistle still divided every weekday into shifts. She was suspicious of stories repeated too cleanly for too many years. One winter evening, she found Caleb oiling Harlan's old tools. Your father never talks about the people who lost their houses, she said. He saved the mill. That isn't what I asked. Anne did not accuse Harlan. She only asked questions Caleb did not want to answer. Why had 3 worker families left Bellwether after the flood? Why did county records describe unavoidable overflow when everyone old enough remembered a wall of timber? Why had Ruth Calder's name disappeared from the payroll books after 1968? Caleb dismissed the questions as Milltown rumors. Anne never pushed. She could leave a question in a room without turning it into a weapon. For 43 years, they lived in the small white house above the cedar stand. Anne planted beans along the south fence. Caleb repaired pumps, culverts, and irrigation gates after the mill closed. They had no children, but Mara spent every summer with them after Caleb's younger brother died. The cedar trees grew with her. Harlan had given Caleb the 11 acres when he retired. Caleb believed it was the one clean thing his father left behind. Then Anne got sick. First came appointments in the city and envelopes from insurance. Then hospital stays, specialist bills, and medications that cost more each month than Caleb once earned in a season. He mortgaged the house without telling her the full amount. Anne found the papers anyway. You can't save me by losing everything, she told him. I'm not losing it. You don't know that. He wanted to tell her the land would cover it. The cedar stand had matured. North Ridge had asked about buying it twice. There was value behind the house. Anne looked toward the trees. Don't sell them, because you're afraid. She died the following spring. The bills remained. So did the mortgage. With a balloon payment, Caleb could not postpone again. That was why Mara wanted him to sign Grant Vale's offer. She believed the cedar stand was the last practical answer. Caleb believed that too, until he walked the North Watershed 8 days before the stop work order. The old logging road had become a trench, exposing roots that no longer held anything. Fire-killed pine leaned downhill in clusters. Several had fallen and locked together above a narrow ravine. Caleb stood there nearly an hour. He did not need a sensor to know what would happen if the next storm arrived warm and heavy. The slope would not release one tree at a time. It would release a structure. Trunks would strike trunks. Root balls would gather mud. The first mass would sweep the rest forward until the alder carried something closer to a moving forest than ordinary flood debris. The county models measured water volume. Caleb saw weight, angle, and momentum. Now, alone in his kitchen, he closed his hand around the C4 key. Harlan's voice returned. First line took the load. Second line turned it. Third line finished the job. Caleb suddenly realized what was wrong. There had never been a third line in the diagrams he remembered. Before sunrise, he carried a shovel, a lantern, and the brass key to the abandoned channel. The stop work notice snapped in the wind behind him. He waded beneath the old concrete footing and dug where mud met stone. After 20 minutes, the shovel struck metal. A square iron hatch emerged beneath the waterline. The lock was clogged, but the key fit. When Caleb lifted the hatch, cold air rose from the chamber below. On the inside of the steel cover, cut deep enough to survive nearly 60 years of rust, was a single letter. By full daylight, the chamber marked C4 had become a black square in the mud beneath the old concrete footing. Caleb lowered a lantern through the opening. Its light settled against iron, silt, and the curved back of an anchor shoe the size of a wagon wheel. The chamber smelled of river water, cedar rot, and old grease. Mara arrived carrying coffee and the expression she used with patients who ignored medical advice. You went down there alone? I opened it alone. That is not an answer. Caleb tied a rope around his waist. Mara checked the knot twice, then braced herself above the hatch while he climbed down. Mud reached his ankles. 3 iron rods disappeared through the wall toward the river, each connected to a chain line buried beneath years of silt. So this is what the key opened? Mara asked. This is where the boom listened. Booms don't listen. Bad ones don't. Caleb wiped mud from the first rod. The metal had been filed with shallow marks, each spaced differently. Most people imagined a log boom as a fence laid across moving water. That was how men built one when they wanted it to fail. A straight barrier took the whole force at once. Logs struck broadside, tangled, and stacked until water rose behind them. The bellwether system had worked differently. The first chain line caught only the leading edge of the debris. The second, set farther downstream at an angle, used that impact to rotate the longer trunks. Once the logs turned with the current, the third line guided them toward the holding pond beside the old mill channel. It never stopped the river, Caleb said. It gave the river somewhere else to carry the weight. Mara looked toward the rods. And if one line broke, it was meant to. He showed her a row of drilled holes in the anchor shoe. They were too even to be rust damage and too deliberate to be weakness from age. Shear holes. A strong pull would break the shoe here first. So the structure was designed to come apart? In order, not all at once. A system that sacrificed one section could protect the next. Sometimes breaking at the right point was the only thing that kept everything else from becoming a dam. Mara was quiet. She was no longer looking at river junk. She was looking at a machine hidden inside the bank. What looked crude above water depended on exact failure below it. The cedar timbers were replaceable. The iron shoes, chain angles, and release sequence carried the intelligence. Caleb understood why younger engineers dismissed it. The system did not resemble a modern machine because most of its moving parts were the river itself. They spent the morning clearing silt. The second rod moved after Caleb worked grease into its collar. The third remained locked. At noon, Owen Mercer arrived with 2 county technicians. He stopped at the open hatch. You entered a confined chamber without county clearance. Mara had a rope. That does not make it safe. It made it safer. Owen walked toward the holding pond. It lay beyond the cottonwoods, a long depression that had once stored hundreds of logs. Now, reeds and young willows covered most of it. A technician pushed a measuring pole into the mud, 6 feet of silt near the inlet. Owen turned to Caleb. The pond has lost most of its capacity. You redirect a debris surge in there. The water could back up into the main channel. It won't take the whole surge. You cannot know that. I know what the angle is for. Owen pointed toward the boom timber Caleb had set. 37 degrees? Caleb nodded. Why 37? My father said that was the turn. For the first time, the answer sounded weak. Owen crouched beside the hatch and examined the shear holes. His irritation gave way to professional attention. If this breaks here, the upstream section swings toward the pond. And the second line takes less direct force, Caleb said. Owen stood slowly. This is not how the surviving county drawings show it. There are no surviving drawings of C4. There are 2 line plans in the archive. There should be 3. Then Walter Dane appeared at the edge of the channel. He was 86 and narrow as a fence rail, with a brown coat buttoned to the throat. He had worked as a mill operations clerk in 1968 and had avoided the old channel for as long as Caleb could remember. Walter saw the open chamber. The color left his face. Close that. Caleb climbed out. Why? It was abandoned for a reason. What reason? Unstable ground. Corroded hardware. Owen looked at him. The county file does not mention this chamber. Walter shifted his cane. Then perhaps it is better left out. Caleb held up the brass key. This was in my father's toolbox. Walter stared at it. He should have thrown that in the river. Mara stepped closer. What is the R inside the hatch? Walter looked from Mara to Caleb. Beneath his fear was recognition. He turned toward the road. Caleb caught his arm. Who was R? Walter pulled free. You're trying to save a town that doesn't remember what that thing cost the first time. He walked away. Owen ordered one technician to photograph every visible surface inside C4. Caleb climbed down again. Near the row of shear holes, hardened grease covered several deeper cuts. He scraped it away with a screwdriver. 2 initials appeared. RG. Beneath them was a date. 1968. Mara read the marks aloud. RC, who is that? Caleb remembered Anne asking why one name vanished from the mill payroll after the flood. Ruth Calder. Before he could say it, Walter's voice returned from the trees behind them. Someone your father should have told you about. The test began just after 9 the next morning. Caleb chose 6 alder trunks from the county cleanup pile, none heavy enough to threaten the bridge if the boom failed. He marked each with white paint, then asked Owen to release them one at a time from the bend above the old mill channel. Owen agreed because he wanted evidence. Grant Vale arrived because he wanted an audience. By 10, Northridge employees and curious townspeople lined the road. Mara stood beside the hand winch, one palm resting on the lever for the second chain line. Caleb had spent the night reconstructing the sequence from memory. First line took the load. Second line turned it. Third line finished the job. He tensioned the first line until the upstream cedar timber sat low in the current. He tightened the second 3 turns beyond it. The third remained slack. The first alder trunk touched the lead timber, rolled once, and slid toward the holding pond. A murmur passed through the crowd. The second trunk followed and turned with the first. For several seconds, the system worked exactly as Caleb had predicted. Then the third trunk arrived with a forked root at one end. The root caught beneath the lead timber. The first chain snapped tight. Caleb heard the note change. Ease the second line, he told Mara. She released half a turn. Too late. The root dragged the first 2 trunks sideways. Instead of rotating toward the holding pond, the cluster swung broadside across the channel. Water piled behind it. The 4th test log struck the jam and climbed halfway over the others. Stop the release, Owen shouted. His technician radioed upstream, but the 5th trunk was already in the current. It hit the pile hard enough to tear the first timber from its guidepost. The chain did not break at the shear holes. It twisted around the anchor shoe and locked. The cluster began moving toward the main channel. Owen sent a county excavator down the bank. Its operator caught the outer trunk with the bucket and pinned the mass against the mud before it could reach the bridge. No one was hurt. Nothing valuable was damaged, but the silence that followed was worse than laughter. Grant looked at the crooked timbers and raised his voice for the phones already recording. That is why permits exist. Caleb climbed into the chamber and tried to free the twisted chain. Above him, Grant continued. One small test. Controlled conditions. County equipment standing by. and it still became a blockage. Owen did not defend Caleb. The structure failed to release, he said. That is the fact. By noon, a video titled "Old Man Builds His Own Dam" had spread through Bellwether. The clip did not show the first two trunks turning correctly. It began with the forked root catching and ended with the excavator holding the jam. Mara watched it once, then shut off her phone. You told me it was designed to break. It is. It didn't. Caleb cleaned grit from the chain. If Owen hadn't been here, Mara said, where would those logs have gone? Into the main channel, toward the bridge. Yes. And you want to test it again when the next thing coming down that river may not be 6 little logs? Caleb did not answer. Mara took the property tax notice from her coat. A late penalty had been added that morning. You spent that money on chain, bolts, and cedar. Grant's offer is still open. We can stop before the county adds more fines. We can't stop what is coming. Then tell me why I should believe this machine can help. Caleb looked at the twisted anchor shoe. Yesterday, he had shown Mara a system built around controlled failure. Today, the wrong part had held too long, while the wrong chain took the force. That was not proof the design had failed. It was proof he had set it incorrectly. The admission hurt more than Grant's laughter. My father's sequence is wrong, Caleb said. Mara stared at him. You built this from something you think he said. From what he taught me. Those are not always the same thing. Harlan's 3 lines had sounded complete because Caleb had repeated them for 60 years. But a sentence could survive longer than its meaning. Maybe Harlan had forgotten a step. Maybe he had left one out. Maybe Caleb had shaped the memory because he needed his father to remain the man in the newspaper photograph. Owen returned after the excavator cleared the final trunk. The county is suspending further tests. The storm will be here before your inspection is finished. That does not give you permission to guess. Caleb almost argued. Instead, he pointed to the anchor shoe. The shear holes should have opened before the line twisted. They did not align with the load. Because I tensioned the second line too early. You don't know that. No, Caleb said. I don't. The answer changed Owen's expression. For the first time, Caleb had not spoken as if memory were evidence. Grant approached with the purchase envelope. Signed today. Northridge will cover the county fine, too. Mara did not reach for it, but she did not tell him to leave. Caleb took the envelope. Grant smiled. Then Caleb used its sealed edge to scrape grease from the inner wall of C4. A small arrow appeared beneath the grime. It did not point toward the second chain line. It pointed toward the holding pond. Below it were 3 shortcuts and 1 long one, arranged like a sequence. Mara knelt beside him. What does that mean? Caleb studied the marks, then the locked third rod. It means we've been pulling in the wrong order. From the road, Walter Dane watched them uncover the arrow. He turned away before Caleb could call his name. But this time, Caleb saw where he went. Not toward town. Toward the abandoned mill office where the old maintenance records had once been stored. The abandoned mill office had not held records in 30 years. Its windows were boarded, its roof sagged over the eastern wall, and blackberry vines had grown through the loading door. Walter Dane moved through them slowly, believing no one had followed him. Caleb and Mara waited until he disappeared inside. You cannot keep chasing an 86-year-old man through condemned buildings, Mara whispered. He walked faster when he saw that arrow. That does not make this safe. No, it makes it useful. They entered through a side door hanging from one hinge. The office smelled of wet paper and mouse nests. Filing cabinets stood open and empty. The mill company had removed the official records when it closed, but Walter was kneeling beside an old dispatch desk, pulling loose a strip of warped floorboard. He froze when Caleb stepped into the room. What are you hiding? Caleb asked. Walter closed his hand around a folded piece of oilcloth. Nothing that will help you now. Then let me decide that. Walter looked toward Mara, perhaps hoping she would stop her uncle. She held out her hand instead. After a long silence, Walter gave her the oilcloth. Inside was not a complete drawing. It was a maintenance card, stained brown at the folds. 3 lines had been drawn from a rough riverbank toward the holding pond. Beside them were 4 pressure marks. The first was short. The second was longer. The third was short again. The fourth was crossed through. Caleb recognized the pattern carved inside C4. What does the crossed mark mean? Mara asked. Walter stared at the floor. It meant the last line was never supposed to take full load. Whose handwriting is this? Caleb asked. Walter's jaw tightened. You already saw the initials. Ruth Calder? Walter did not answer directly. She understood that river better than most men who signed their names above hers. It was the closest he had come to admitting anything. Caleb studied the card. The sequence did not describe which chain should be tightened first. It described when each line should be allowed to move. He had treated tension as something to lock in place. The system treated tension as something to pass forward. Outside, rain began striking the boarded windows. Not the atmospheric river predicted for later in the week. Just the leading edge, a narrow band of warm rain moving across the watershed. Caleb folded the maintenance card. I need the third rod freed. Walter caught his sleeve. Do not rebuild the whole thing. Why? Because once it works, people will start asking why it disappeared. Caleb looked at him. That is what you are afraid of? Walter released his sleeve. I'm afraid of what your father left you to carry. By the time Caleb and Mara returned to the channel, the alder had risen 4 inches. Owen was already there. A county sensor upstream had reported a sudden increase in floating debris. The rain had loosened small branches, burned roots, and several dead trees from the lower edge of the scar. Grant Vale stood beside a Northridge truck, speaking into his phone. This is not your test, Owen told Caleb. This is live water. That is why we need to clear the third rod. You are still under a stop work order. A radio crackled at Owen's shoulder. The upstream technician reported 2 trunks moving toward the bend. One carried a root ball nearly 8 feet across. Owen looked toward the new bridge, then toward the old boom. What do you need? Caleb handed Mara the maintenance card. First line loose enough to take the head. Second line only after the long trunk turns. Third line stays free until the root passes the inlet. Owen read the sequence. This is different from yesterday. Yesterday I tried to make the boom hold. And today? Today we let it move. They freed the third rod with a hydraulic jack from the county truck. Caleb reset the twisted chain and replaced the damaged guide timber. There was no crowd this time, only rain, machinery, and the sound of water growing heavier against the bank. The first debris appeared around the bend as a tangle of branches. It struck the lead timber. The chain tightened, but Caleb did not lock it. The timber drifted backward 3 feet, absorbing the impact instead of resisting it. The branches began sliding along its angled surface toward the mill channel. Then the first full trunk arrived. It hit near the center and rolled. Second line, Caleb said. Mara pulled the lever. The downstream timber caught the trunk's narrower end. For a moment, the tree hung between both lines. Then the current turned it parallel to the channel and carried it toward the holding pond. Owen watched without speaking. The second trunk came faster, its root ball dragging mud and smaller trees behind it. The mass struck the boom with a sound like a door slammed inside the earth. The first chain line pulled tight. A shear hole opened. The anchor shoe broke exactly where Caleb had said it should. Mara flinched, but instead of collapsing, the upstream section swung downstream. The moving timber struck the side of the root ball and changed its angle just enough. The root mass missed the main bridge channel. It rolled into the old holding pond, pulling the branches and smaller trunks behind it. Water surged through the broken section, then fell. The remaining 2 lines held. For several seconds, no one moved. The boom was damaged. One cedar guide had split. A chain lay half submerged, and mud boiled through the pond inlet. But the debris was no longer moving toward the bridge. Owen walked to the bank and stared at the broken anchor. That part was supposed to fail. Caleb nodded. And if it had not, the root ball would have turned broadside. Owen looked toward the bridge. It would have caught between the center piers. Grant approached from the truck. Those logs are Northridge property. Mara turned sharply. You called them a public hazard 10 minutes ago. They still carry company marks. Grant pointed toward the holding pond. Caleb built the boom. He cannot claim salvage rights over timber from our lease. Caleb reached inside his coat and gave Owen a folded county form. Owen opened it. It was dated 3 days before the first chain had been installed. Caleb had formally surrendered any claim to timber, machinery, minerals, or recoverable material caught by the boom. Everything diverted into the holding pond would remain under county control until ownership and liability were established. Mara read the form over Owen's shoulder. You signed away the wood before you started? There was never any wood in this for me. Grant's accusation died without an argument. But Owen was no longer looking at the form. He was studying the root ball lodged in the pond. 3 smaller trunks were woven through it so tightly they had moved as one object. His tablet model treated each tree as separate debris. The river did not. Owen walked onto the bridge and measured the distance between the center piers. Then, he looked back at the root mass. It was wider than the opening. "If that reaches the bridge during the main storm," he said, "the piers will catch it." Caleb joined him, and everything behind it. Owen looked toward Main Street below the eastern approach. The bridge designed to carry traffic safely over floodwater could become the structure that trapped the forest, backed up the river, and forced it through the town. The boom had just proven Caleb right. It had also proven the approaching danger was worse than either of them had calculated. Owen returned to C4 with a portable scanner. "If there is a complete sequence inside that chamber," he said, "we find it now." Behind the broken anchor shoe, the scanner detected a second iron plate. Someone had installed it backward, hiding whatever had been written on its face. Rain tapped against the sheet metal roof. Owen's crew had stretched over chamber C4. The scanner showed a narrow gap behind the anchor shoe. Someone had bolted a second iron plate against the wall with its face turned inward, as if the writing mattered more than the metal. Owen removed the upper bolt. Caleb took the lower one. Mud and rust had sealed the plate in place for nearly 60 years. Mara held the work light while Caleb slid a pry bar beneath one edge. The iron gave with a sound like a breath dragged through clenched teeth. When it came free, it fell into Caleb's hands face down. The backside held 4 hammered dents, matching Walter's maintenance card. "Short. Long. Short. Release." Owen crouched beside him. "Turn it over." Caleb dit. The words had been cut by hand. Ruth Calder. Deflection sequence, C4. Aprilo mia no sute shaizich, she opt. Below the name was a drawing of the 3 anchor positions. Arrows showed the first timber moving backward under impact, the second rotating the debris, and the third remaining free until the mass crossed the pond inlet. The design Caleb had carried in fragments for most of his life was there in full, but his father's name was not. Mara read the inscription twice. So Ruth designed it. Walter stood at the chamber entrance beneath the rain shelter. No one had heard him arrive. Caleb climbed out with the plate against his chest. "Tell me, this is a repair note." Walter did not. "Tell me she only changed one part." "She changed all of it." The river moved behind them, brown and rising. Walter said Ruth had begun as a scaler, measuring timber as it entered the mill. She kept notebooks on current speed, log length, root drag, and how different species behaved after days in water. The mill engineers mocked her calculations because she had no degree and no authority to approve structural work. Then a spring jam broke an older boom and nearly took the catwalk with it. Ruth drew a replacement that did not resist the river at full force. It redirected the load through controlled movement and planned failure. Harlan helped her build the first working section. Caleb seized on that. So he was part of it. Yes. He understood it. Yes. Then why was her plate turned backward? Walter's silence lasted too long. Owen stepped closer. Who authorized the final plans? The mill owner would not put a woman's name on a river control system, Walter said. Harlan was a foreman, married, respected, born here. They let him sign. Caleb looked at the plate. Every story placed Harlan alone at the center. Ruth's name had not been reduced. It had been removed. My father could have corrected it. He could have. The words landed harder than accusation because Walter spoke them without anger. Mara watched Caleb carefully. He had expected C4 to prove Harlan's knowledge. Instead, it proved the knowledge belonged first to someone else. Still, he resisted the deeper conclusion. Harlan kept the key. Walter nodded, maybe because he meant to put it right. Maybe. The answer offered no comfort. Owen laid Ruth's plate on a tarp and photographed it beside the maintenance card. This changes the technical assessment. If the sequence is authentic, the boom was engineered as a debris deflection system. It is authentic, Caleb said. The inscription is. We still do not know what happened in 1968 or why the county drawings were altered. Walter turned away. Caleb saw fear in him, not grief. Before he could press further, Grant Vale's truck pulled beside the channel. Grant stepped out carrying a leather folder. He glanced at Ruth's plate and understood the conversation had changed. What did you find? Company history, Owen said. Northridge did not own the mill in 1968. No, Mara replied. But you seem worried. Grant opened the folder. Northridge's offer had been increased. The amount could pay Caleb's balloon mortgage, cover the county penalties, replace the property tax money, and leave nearly $40,000 after closing. Grant placed the contract on the truck hood. In return, Northridge takes the cedar stand and a temporary easement through the old mill channel. For what? Caleb asked. Storm cleanup. You mean control of the holding pond? I mean professional management of a hazardous site. Owen picked up the contract. The easement lets Northridge remove existing boom components. Grant did not deny it. Mara stared at the number. For months, she had urged Caleb to sell the trees. This offer did more than save the house. It gave them time and freedom from the debt Anne's illness had left behind. Grant lowered his voice. You proved your point. The boom can redirect small debris. Let the county study it after the storm. Sign now, and no one has to gamble a town on an undocumented system. Your company's trees are already in the pond, Caleb said. Deadfall crosses lease boundaries. Your paint marks don't. Grant's jaw tightened. The next surge could expose how much cut timber and fire-killed debris Northridge had failed to remove from the upper roads. He wanted more than Caleb's cedar. He wanted control of what the river might deliver as evidence. Mara pulled Caleb aside. This is enough to keep the house. I know. You can preserve the plate. Give it to the county. Let Owen study the boom later. Caleb looked toward C4. The river had risen another inch. On Owen's tablet, a weather alert appeared. The atmospheric river had accelerated. 36 hours had become 24. Walter saw the alert and whispered, "There isn't time." Caleb turned to him. Time for what? Walter's eyes moved to Ruth's plate, to learn why that sequence was never used the way she wrote it. Grant pushed a pen across the truck hood. Signed Caleb. The offer could save the house. Ruth's design might save the town. But the plate had opened a third danger between them. If Caleb continued, he might discover that Harlan had done more than accept another person's credit. He might discover why Bellwether had needed that lie in the first place. The county order arrived before sunrise. It was not another warning taped to Caleb's door. This one carried the signature of county council and authorized emergency removal of any unapproved structure that might obstruct floodwater. Owen read it beneath the temporary shelter at C4, while rain ran from the edge of the metal roof. They want the boom cleared by 2 this afternoon, he said. Caleb looked toward the river. And the storm? Expected after midnight. That gives us 10 hours. It gives the county 10 hours to dismantle everything you built. Owen's voice held none of the certainty it had 4 days earlier. He had sent Ruth's plate, the maintenance card, and his measurements to county headquarters. The response had not discussed the evidence. It had discussed liability. If the county allowed an undocumented boom to remain, and it failed, Bellwether could sue. If the county removed it, and the flood struck, officials could blame an unpredictable natural event. Paper-protected institutions more easily than timber-protected towns. Owen folded the order. I requested a delay, and they denied it. The first Northridge loader appeared on the mill road 15 minutes later. Then came 2 excavators, a chain truck, and a crew wearing orange rain gear. Grant Vale stepped from the lead vehicle with a copy of the county order sealed in plastic. We've been contracted to assist with emergency clearance, he said. Owen examined the work authorization. This only permits removal under county supervision. Then supervise. Grant pointed toward the holding pond. His crews were not positioned near the temporary guide timbers. They were positioned near the debris diverted during the previous rain, the root ball, the marked trunks, and the mud-covered wood carrying Northridge inventory paint. Caleb understood immediately. Grant intended to remove the evidence first. No machinery enters the pond, Caleb said. Grant looked past him. You no longer control this site. Neither do you. The county does. Owen stepped between them. Nothing in that pond moves until it is photographed and cataloged. Grant's expression hardened. The storm is coming. We do not have time for an investigation. That is exactly why we document it now. For the first time, Owen's authority worked in Caleb's favor. Grant withdrew toward his crew, but he did not order them to leave. The engines remained running. Steel buckets rested above the mud like waiting jaws. Mara arrived carrying the unsigned purchase contract. She had not slept. Damp hair clung to her face, and the envelope Caleb had used to scrape the chamber wall was folded beneath one arm. We need to talk without Grant standing beside us. They walked toward the cedar stand above the house. Rain darkened the trunks. Caleb had planted none of them. Harlan had given him the land when the trees were already young. Mara handed him the contract. I spoke to the bank. Caleb waited. They will not extend the balloon payment again. If you do not sell, foreclosure begins next month. I know. No. You know you may lose the house. You have not said what that means for me. Caleb looked at her. She had grown up there after her father died. Anne had taught her to cook in that kitchen. Caleb had promised the property would become hers. Mara's objection was no longer only fear for him. It was grief for a future she believed had already been settled. You told me the house would stay in the family, she said. I meant it when I said it. And now, Caleb looked through the trees toward the old channel. Now I don't know what this land was bought with. Mara understood the implication. Ruth's stolen credit might not be the only benefit Harlan received. That is not proof, she said. No. Then do not give away our future because Walter is afraid to finish a sentence. The words were sharp, but Caleb did not resent them. Mara had earned the right to ask what his decision would cost her. Before he could answer, Owen called from below. Ruth's plate was missing. They found Walter behind the abandoned mill office with the iron plate wrapped in his coat. He had made it less than 50 yards. Caleb took the plate from him. You kept this hidden once already. Walter's breath came hard from the effort. I was trying to keep you from using it. Why? Because if you prove the sequence works, they will compare it to the 68 report. That is the point. No. You still think the report is only missing Ruth's name. Walter sank onto an old concrete step. Rain collected on his glasses. I wrote it. Owen stopped beside him. You wrote the flood report? I typed the maintenance summary. The mill owner dictated it. Your father signed the operational statement. Caleb felt the plate grow heavier in his hands. Walter continued. The original log showed that C4 had been ready. Ruth had ordered the third line held free until the main debris mass crossed the pond inlet. But valuable timber was already trapped inside the holding pond. The mill owner feared the flood would bury it beneath mud. He ordered the release line opened early. Walter had changed the recorded time afterward. How much earlier? Owen asked. 11 minutes. Caleb stared at him. 11 minutes could change, where an entire debris field turned. Did Harlan open it? Caleb asked. Walter looked at the ground. He was at the release station. That is not what I asked. Walter's voice nearly disappeared beneath the rain. Yes. Caleb stepped back. The confession did not yet reveal every consequence of that choice, but it destroyed the last defense he had built around his father. Harlan had not merely accepted Ruth's credit. He had ignored her sequence. Walter wiped his glasses with a trembling hand. I changed the log because they said the mill would close. Hundreds of men would lose work. I had a wife, 2 children, and a company house. I told myself one time on a page could not bring anyone back. Who did not come back? Mara asked. Walter looked toward the river. He did not answer. A Northridge foreman shouted from the road. Grant's crew had begun attaching chains to the first guide timber. Owen ran toward them and ordered the work stopped. Caleb remained with Walter for one more second. You are going to tell me everything. If we live through tonight. They returned to C4 as the Weather Service issued a flash flood watch. Owen spread Ruth's diagram beside current measurements. The holding pond could accept the first debris mass, but the temporary boom lacked enough weight to survive the initial strike. Caleb calculated the missing material. 6 straight cedar trunks, each at least 30 feet long. 2 cribbed counterweights. 1 sacrificial release beam. Mara saw the numbers before he spoke. The only trees close enough, strong enough, and available before dark stood behind their house. Their cedar stand. Grant's contract could turn those trees into enough money to save the property. The boom would turn them into something the river was designed to destroy. Mara looked at Caleb. If you cut them, there is no sale. I know. No mortgage payment. I know. No house for you to leave me. Caleb looked toward the old mill channel, then at Ruth's plate. For nearly 60 years, his family had carried a hero's name. By nightfall, Caleb would have to decide whether the trees that protected that inheritance would be sold to preserve it or cut down to correct what the inheritance had been built upon. He took the brass C4 key from his pocket and placed it in Mara's hand. Bring the saws. Behind them, Walter rose slowly from the concrete step. Before a single cedar fell, he would have to tell them what happened after Harlan opened Ruth Calder's line 11 minutes too early. The first cedar stood 40 yards behind Caleb's house. Its trunk was straight, nearly 34 feet before the first major branch. Harlan had marked it with a shallow axe cut when Caleb was a boy, telling him that one day the tree would be worth more than anything they owned inside the house. Caleb rested the chainsaw against its roots. Before he pulled the starter cord, Walter said, Samuel Calder died because your father opened that line. The rain seemed to quiet around them. Mara lowered the fuel can. Caleb turned slowly. Walter stood beneath the trees with Owen beside him. He had brought the old maintenance summary in a plastic folder and another document none of them had seen before, a carbon copy folded into quarters. "Tell it from the beginning," Caleb said. Walter looked toward the river. On the night of the 1968 flood, Ruth's system had worked through the first surge. The lead chain took the initial timber. The second line rotated the larger trunks. The third held free, waiting for the main debris mass to pass the mouth of the holding pond. But the pond already contained nearly 200 finished logs belonging to the mill. The mill owner feared Ruth's sequence would bury them beneath mud and broken trees. He ordered Harlan to open the final release line 11 minutes early. Ruth refused. Harlan did not. He said the mill employed half the town, Walter said. He said if the timber was lost, the company might not reopen. Caleb looked down at the cedar. He could hear Harlan's voice as clearly as if his father stood beside him. First line took the load. Second line turned it. Third line finished the job. But Harlan had never said what finishing the job meant. When he released the third line early, the outer boom swung away before the debris field had crossed the inlet. The finished logs inside the pond escaped first. They struck the incoming mass and turned it broadside. The river carried the combined raft back toward the main channel. Walter had watched from the dispatch window. It did not look like water anymore, he said. It looked like the whole mountain had started moving. The debris hit the worker district below the mill. 7 houses were torn from their foundations. A bunkhouse collapsed. The access road disappeared beneath mud and logs, cutting families off from the higher ground near the church. Samuel Calder, Ruth's younger brother, had already helped several children across the mill footbridge. He went back when he heard that an elderly couple remained in the last house near the bank. He reached them. All 3 were halfway across the yard when the debris struck. The couple survived beneath the porch roof of another house. Samuel did not. Mara closed her eyes. Caleb remembered the name from a brass plaque at the old church, one among several listed beneath the words, "Lost to the flood." No one had ever connected Samuel's death to the mill's decision. The official report said the debris came over the riverbank naturally, Owen said. Walter nodded. That was the sentence they gave me. The original maintenance log showed Ruth's sequence, Harlan's early release, and the exact minute the debris changed direction. The version Walter typed described an uncontrollable overflow caused by record rainfall. Harlan signed the operational statement. The mill owner signed the damage report. Ruth refused to sign either. 3 worker families filed compensation claims. Each claimed the mill had changed the boom during the flood. Without the original log, the company called their accusations grief and confusion. Their claims were denied. One family moved east to live with relatives. Another sold what remained of their property for almost nothing. The third stayed in Bellwether, but spent 14 years paying debt on a house that no longer existed. And Ruth? Mara asked. The company blamed her design, Walter said. They said the system had been experimental. They offered to avoid a public negligence hearing if she resigned and left town. Did she agree? She agreed to leave. She never agreed they were right. Walter unfolded the carbon copy. It was a letter Ruth had written to the county 2 weeks after the flood. She described the early release, named Harlan and the mill owner, and requested a technical investigation. The letter had never reached the county. Walter had been told to destroy it. He had kept the copy. Caleb took the page. Ruth's handwriting was narrow and controlled. There was no anger in it. Only sequence, time, consequence, and names. Near the bottom she had written, "A system designed to fail safely cannot protect anyone when profit decides which part is allowed to break." Caleb read the sentence twice. Then, Walter handed him the final document. It was a property transfer record. 6 months after the investigation closed, Bellwether Lumber granted 11 acres of cedar land to Harlan Rusk for $1 and continued loyalty during operational hardship. The legal description matched Caleb's property. The trees around them changed meaning without moving. The land had not been a retirement gift. It had been payment. Mara looked toward the house where Anne had raised her, where Caleb had promised she would always belong. Our home came from this? Caleb could not soften the answer. Yes. Walter stepped forward. Harlan may have believed he was protecting jobs. The mill did stay open another 23 years. And Samuel stayed dead, Mara said. Walter lowered his head. So did the lost houses. So did the denied claims. So did Ruth's erased name. Caleb had spent his life believing Harlan gave him the land because he had worked hard and remained loyal to the river. The truth was uglier. The land was the shape silence had taken after the flood. Owen unfolded a temporary trust document he had asked the county attorney to prepare after Ruth's plate was discovered. It transferred the old mill channel and Caleb's remaining property rights into a restitution trust, pending a full investigation. Caleb could continue living in the house, but he could no longer sell the land or pass it privately to Mara. The trust would ultimately represent the Calder family and the descendants of the 3 denied claimants. Mara read every page. Signing would cost her the inheritance Caleb had promised. Not signing would preserve a benefit created by the same cover-up they now intended to expose. Caleb held out the pen. Mara did not stop him. He signed his name beneath the provisional title, Calder River Restitution Trust. Then he signed permission for the cedar to be used in emergency construction. The choice did not erase Harlan's decision. It did not restore Samuel's life or rebuild 7 houses. It did not make Ruth's exile fair. It only stopped Caleb from passing the reward for silence into another generation. He handed the signed documents to Owen. File them before the county office closes. Owen looked toward the sky. They are closing early for the storm. Then call someone who can stamp a page. Mara picked up the chainsaw. Caleb reached for it, but she held on. You cannot cut 6 trees alone. The first cedar fell shortly after noon. Its trunk struck the wet ground with a force Caleb felt through his boots. Northridge's crew stopped working at the channel and looked uphill. One by one, the trees that could have saved Caleb's house became the timbers intended to save Bellwether. As the 3rd cedar fell, a sound rolled down from the northern ridge. It was not thunder. It was the deep, splintering roar of hundreds of roots beginning to tear free at once. Walter looked toward the burn scar. The mountain is moving. Caleb wiped rain from his face and pointed toward the channel. Then we finish Ruth's boom before it reaches the river. The last cedar reached the mill channel at 2:17 inches the afternoon. Northridge's loader carried it downhill while Caleb walked beside the trunk, one hand pressed against the wet bark. Grant had not given permission. His foreman had moved the machine after Owen threatened to seize it under emergency authority. There was no longer time to argue about ownership. The river had turned the color of old iron. Mara and 3 volunteers lashed the cedar into the second counterweight crib, while Walter stood inside C4, with Ruth's maintenance card protected beneath his coat. His hands trembled, but his voice remained steady as he called out the sequence. Lead line free. Caleb checked the upstream chain. Free. Second line at half tension. Half. Third line open until the pond takes the head. Owen watched water level readings climb across his tablet. The sensors showed a rise of 18 inches in 12 minutes. Then, one upstream station disappeared from the network. A second followed. Owen called county headquarters. We need Main Street evacuated now. The emergency coordinator told him no evacuation order had been authorized. Current models still placed the river below the eastern levee. The models do not include the debris mass, Owen said. The coordinator ordered him to maintain the stop work boundary and wait for confirmation. Owen looked toward the bridge. Mud, branches, and bark already covered the water from bank to bank. He shut off the radio. Then, he used the county emergency channel to order the evacuation himself. Sirens began across Bellwether. Mara left the channel and drove to the clinic. She moved 6 elderly patients into church vans, sent volunteers door to door along Main Street, and arranged for the nursing home's oxygen equipment to be transferred to the high school gym. No one asked whether Caleb's boom had a permit anymore. They only asked how much time remained. Walter stayed at C4. Nearly 60 years earlier, he had changed 11 minutes on a page because he was afraid of losing his company house. Now he stood in the same rain, ready to operate the sequence he had helped erase. You can still leave, Caleb told him. Walter tightened his coat. I already left once. At 3:06, the first full debris mass appeared beyond the north bend. It was larger than anything Caleb had seen during his years at the mill. Burned pine trunks moved together beneath a roof of branches. Root balls carried stones, fence wire, and sections of logging road. Mud filled the spaces between them, turning hundreds of separate objects into a single advancing structure. Several trunks carried blue inventory paint. Northridge blue. Grant saw the marks. His face changed. The debris did not merely prove Caleb's warning. It showed that the company had left unstable timber above the watershed in quantities Grant had repeatedly denied. One of the Northridge access roads collapsed behind the surge, blocking the evacuation route from the northern homes. Grant stood motionless until Mara's voice came over Owen's radio. "We have 2 vans trapped above the mill road." Owen pointed at Grant's loaders. "Open the service ridge. That road is restricted. There are patients in those vans." Grant looked at the river, the company marks, and the workers waiting for his decision. Then, he ordered both excavators uphill. The machines cut through a berm Northridge had built to keep the public from its lease. Within minutes, the first van crossed onto higher ground. Grant did not apologize. He climbed into the second loader himself and returned for the remaining vehicle. At the channel, Caleb waited for the front of the debris field to reach the lead timber. The first impact came as a deep metallic blow. The upstream cedar disappeared beneath branches. The lead chain pulled tight, dragged 3 feet through its guide, and began transferring force toward the second anchor. "Hold it loose," Walter called. Caleb kept his hands away from the locking pin. Every instinct told him to secure the line. Ruth's sequence demanded the opposite. The cedar moved backward another foot. Its angle changed, presenting the debris with a sloping surface instead of a wall. The leading trunks began to rotate. "Second line," Walter said. Caleb pulled the lever. The downstream chain caught the outer edge of the moving mass. Long trunks turned toward the old mill channel. The first root balls followed, tearing reeds from the holding pond as they entered. For a moment, the boom appeared to hold the entire forest. Then the first shear shoe broke. The sound cracked across the river. The upstream section swung downstream exactly as Ruth had designed. It struck the side of the debris raft and forced another layer into the pond. Water rose behind the remaining mass. At the bridge, Owen saw 2 root balls strike the center piers. They lodged between the concrete columns. More timber pressed behind them. The river began backing toward Main Street. "Third line," Caleb shouted. Walter checked the maintenance card. "Not yet. The bridge is catching. If you release now, we repeat 68. Caleb looked at the water climbing behind the bridge, then at the debris still approaching the pond inlet. Harlan had chosen 11 minutes too early. Caleb waited. The second anchor screamed under the load. 1 cedar counterweight lifted halfway out of its crib. Mara returned from the evacuation route and reached the channel as a chain link split near the release station. "Caleb, I see it." The main debris head crossed the pond inlet. Walter raised his hand. "Now." Caleb opened the third line. The remaining boom rotated toward the holding pond. Hundreds of trunks slid after it, pulled by the same weight that had threatened to destroy the structure. The pressure against the bridge fell, but one section of the boom did not move. A twisted branch had wrapped itself around the final release chain. If the line stayed locked, the trailing debris would pile against the channel entrance and force everything back toward the bridge. Caleb grabbed a cutting torch. Owen saw him step onto the flooded platform. "If you cut that chain, you lose the entire boom." Caleb lit the torch. The chain carried the weight of the last 2 cedar sections, the counterweight crib, and nearly everything Caleb had built. He looked at Ruth's plate lying beneath the shelter. The system had never been designed to survive at any cost. It had been designed to let the right thing break. Caleb lowered the flame. The first link glowed orange. Mara reached the platform, but did not try to stop him. The chain separated. The final cedar section spun into the current. It struck the trapped debris, opened the channel, and carried the remaining timber into the holding pond. Then the boom came apart. Chains vanished beneath the flood. Cedar timbers rolled through mud. C4 filled with water as the last release rod tore free from the wall. The system destroyed itself in less than 30 seconds. The river level at the bridge dropped. Water pulled away from Main Street. By sunset, the rain had weakened. Bellwether remained standing. 7 Northridge machines sat buried to their axles in mud. The holding pond was packed with broken trees. Caleb's cedar timbers lay scattered among them, impossible to separate from the debris they had redirected. Owen recorded a statement before county officials could arrive. "The bridge would have trapped the surge," he said into the camera. Caleb Rusk identified a failure mode our models missed. Ruth Calder's sequence redirected the debris and prevented the river from entering Main Street. Walter stood beside him and gave his full name. Then he admitted that he had altered the 1,968 maintenance record. Grant authorized Northridge equipment and crews to remain through the night, but he offered no speech. The painted trunks in the pond spoke more clearly than any apology he could make. Caleb stood at the edge of the ruined channel. Mara joined him. Behind them, the house still stood above the cut cedar land. But the trees were gone, the mortgage remained, and the property no longer belonged to them alone. The town had survived the flood. Now Bellwether would have to decide what surviving the truth required. 6 months after the flood, the Alder River ran narrow and clear through Bellwether. The holding pond was empty again. North Ridge crews had removed the burned trunks under the supervision of county investigators, photographing every inventory mark before the wood left the site. The old mill channel remained scarred, its banks cut open where the boom had torn free. Nothing was rebuilt exactly as it had been. The investigation into the 1968 flood lasted through winter. Walter Dane testified twice before the county commission. The first time, he read from the maintenance summary he had altered. The second time, he brought Ruth Calder's carbon copy letter and explained why he had kept it hidden for nearly 60 years. He did not ask to be forgiven. He described what he had done, who had ordered it, and what fear had allowed him to justify. County archivists corrected the official record. Ruth Calder was listed as the designer of deflection sequence C4. Harlan Rusk's operational statement was marked as materially false. Samuel Calder's death was no longer described only as a casualty of natural flooding. The revised report connected it to the premature release of the mill's third line. 3 compensation claims once dismissed as grief and confusion were reopened. One family had no living members who remembered Bellwether. Another had scattered across 4 states. The third still lived in the county, less than 5 miles from the land they had lost. The settlements could not restore their homes. They covered unpaid claims, decades of interest, and legal costs. North Ridge contributed after the investigation documented neglected debris above its lease roads. The county added funds for relying on incomplete historical records when designing the bridge. The successor corporation to Bellwether Lumber paid the largest share. No one called the money justice. The documents used the more accurate word, restitution. The Calder River Restitution Trust received title to Caleb's 11 acres, the abandoned mill channel, and the remaining portion of the cedar stand. Caleb's mortgage presented the hardest problem. The bank could have foreclosed. The trees that might have paid the balloon balance were gone, and the property no longer belonged to Caleb privately. The trust eventually bought the remaining mortgage using part of the settlement fund. But it did not return the house to Caleb. The white house above the channel became the Calder River Training House. Caleb received the right to live there for the rest of his life. Afterward, the building would remain with the trust and be used by river workers, emergency planners, and students learning watershed management. Mara would not inherit it. The decision hurt even after she understood it. One evening, she stood in Anne's kitchen while Caleb removed Harlan's newspaper photograph from the wall. "You promised this place would be mine," she said. "I did. I know why that cannot happen now. That doesn't mean you have to pretend it costs nothing." Mara looked through the window toward the cut cedar land. For most of her life, inheritance had meant a house, trees, and a place no one could take from her. Now the property would belong to people whose names had once been removed from the story that created it. Caleb placed Harlan's photograph inside the old toolbox, instead of destroying it. He would not erase his father to correct what his father had erased. Mara rested her hand on the kitchen table. "Maybe inheriting the truth is enough," she said. "No," Caleb replied. "But it's where we start." Owen Mercer returned to the river in early spring. The county had suspended him for ordering the evacuation without authorization. 2 weeks later, after the flood analysis confirmed that Main Street would probably have been inundated, he was reinstated and assigned to lead a new debris management program. He did not rebuild Ruth's boom as a historical replica. He worked with Caleb, forestry crews, structural engineers, and members of the Calder family to design something new. Electronic sensors monitored soil movement and debris accumulation above the burn scar. Cameras measured root ball size instead of counting individual trees. The bridge received emergency release barriers designed to prevent timber from locking between its center piers. At the old mill channel, the new deflection system used replaceable timber sections, movable anchor lines, and sacrificial joints based on Ruth's original sequence. Modern instruments could warn them when the mountain moved. Ruth's geometry told them what to do with the weight after it reached the river. The county named the method the Calder Deflection Protocol. There was no statue, no polished museum display. Ruth's name appeared, where she had always wanted it to appear on working plans. Caleb began teaching at the training house twice each week. His first class included young county engineers, 2 forestry apprentices, a North Ridge equipment operator, and a 17-year-old girl whose great-grandmother had belonged to one of the families denied compensation in 1968. Caleb took them to the river before sunrise. He showed them how foam gathered before a change in current. He taught them to watch the water beside a moving object instead of staring only at the object itself. He hung different weights from short sections of chain and made the students listen as tension changed. Numbers mattered, he told them. Sensors mattered. Modals mattered. But no instrument could help a person who refused to notice what the instrument had not been asked to measure. Walter attended the first lesson. He sat beneath a cottonwood with Ruth's maintenance card resting across his knees. When the class ended, he handed the card to the Calder family representative. It was the last original record he possessed. He did not stay for coffee. A year after the flood, the training house held its first full emergency exercise. No crowds came, no television station covered it. The students moved quietly between the bridge, the mill channel, and the new release station. On a wooden table beside Caleb lay one object recovered from the mud, a twisted section of the final release chain. It had not been polished. Mud remained inside 2 of the links. Caleb used it to demonstrate how metal changed shape before failure and why a release point had to break before the whole structure became a trap. One student lifted the chain. So the old boom failed? Caleb looked across the channel. Willows had begun growing again along the holding pond. Water passed between them without hurry, carrying small leaves toward the river. No, he said. It went exactly where it was supposed to go. The student placed the chain back on the table. The old boom was gone. The lie was gone with it. But the river still remembered the way Ruth Calder had taught it to turn.